Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 56 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Nashville Predators, in which the Sharks have lost 4-2. And it's been a bit of a strange few weeks for the San Jose Sharks recently. Due to the combination of the All-Star break and the bye week, they had 13 straight days without playing an NHL regular season game, and they immediately came out of that with a grind of 4 games in 6 nights, including a decent amount of travel between those games, and then immediately after that headed right into another 4 days off before finally tonight coming back and getting to a regular-ish schedule of playing against the Nashville Predators. So it's, for a team that's already been struggling thus far this season and is not very good, it's definitely very difficult to get into an actual rhythm of playing when there's this much up and downs in terms of your scheduling situation. This is not to give an excuse for the San Jose Sharks' performance as of late, which has included 2 games in 4 nights, or two out of 4 games in which they've been shut out, but it is somewhat of a reasoning for why maybe things haven't been all that clean for this team as of late. And in this game to start was not all that much different. While the first period wasn't necessarily terrible from a San Jose Sharks perspective, it was quite clear who was the better team. That was Nashville, and they came out playing a better game than San Jose and would score the only goal of that first period coming from Kiefer Sherwood to make it 1-0 Nashville at the end of the first 20 minutes. And if you may have thought that the first period wasn't great for San Jose, the second period was even worse. As for the first half or so of that middle frame, the Sharks wouldn't even manage to generate a shot and were instead essentially just on the back foot the entirety of the time, getting pelted by multiple Nashville Predators chances. And eventually it amounted to a goal for Nashville that would make it 2-0 for the Predators, coming on the power play from Philip Forsberg. While they would manage a few shots near the end of the second period, nothing would actually go in, nothing particularly dangerous would come up for San Jose, and so after 40 minutes they'd be down 2-0, and as I mentioned, they'd already been shut out twice in their last 4 games, and so it seemed as though they were on their way to getting yet another shutout accumulated to an already pretty offensively anemic season for the team. But in the third period instead, they actually woke up a bit, and this started just a couple of minutes in when Mikael Granlund would score to cut the lead in half. Unfortunately for San Jose, Sherwood would get his second of the night to put the lead back up at 2 before Zadina would cut it to within 1 once again. However, the Sharks could not generate another goal in the third period to actually end up tying the game. And what's quite interesting and sort of weird for San Jose is that they put up a really strong third period. They were the better team through the last 20 minutes of this game, but this is not the first time that this has actually happened thus far in this season, where they'll put up a really strong third period, but then when it gets to the point of pulling the goaltender and going for the 6-on-5 situation, the Sharks seemingly just fall apart. I don't know if this is just the pressure of having to try and tie the game at this position, or perhaps it is the fact that there are maybe each player is individually trying to just do too much to try and be the difference maker. But for whatever reason, after a strong 17 or 18 minutes of play, they come to the last 2 minutes of the game, they just can't get settled. There's nothing working. They're making really awful plays where they're really hard reverses in the defensive zone where players can't catch it, or trying to force the puck into the zone when you don't actually have the support, making these bouncing passes that are very difficult to catch near the blue line. And so generally, even though they pulled the goaltender, they're looking really good into the third period, the last 2 minutes, the Sharks generate nothing in terms of chances. And as such, with an empty netter being added, eventually for Nashville, they lose it 4-2. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the top line of Duclair, Granlund, and Zetterlund. And I obviously haven't been a huge fan of this top line as of late for San Jose. I was a sort of advocate of splitting up these 3 players, at least somewhat, maybe moving one of them off the top line, because I just don't think they really complement each other particularly well. And through the first 2 periods of this game, that seemed to be hanging true. While they would get a chance here or there, as they usually do, through the first 40 minutes, they really weren't all that great for San Jose. But it was the third period where definitely things seemed to turn around, and they finally found some actual pressure in the offensive zone. This started with the Mikael Granlund goal, but there was even another chance later on which came very close to going in that they had to go to a review as the net was knocked off, things like that. But they actually looked pretty good in that final frame. We'll see if they can actually carry it forward. I'm not super confident in something like that happening. I think this was maybe catching a bit of lightning in the bottle against a Nashville Predators team that clearly was not expecting the Sharks to come out as good as they did in the third period. But you got to give credit where credit is due. They looked good for that last period. Then we get to the second line. And while this line, kind of like the first line, was not doing much in the first two periods, unlike the first line, the third period was also quite bad, and this was definitely, at least relative to the expectations, the Sharks' worst line of the night for sure. When it comes to William Eklund, who has been quite good in each of his last few games, this was one of his down games of the year, one of his most down games of the year. There was just not a very good performance here tonight. His defensive game was rather shaky, but also his offensive game, which can usually be relied upon to at least individually make a few nice plays here or there. There really wasn't anything seemingly doing for William Eklund here tonight. Anytime he would get the puck, he would try, as he usually does, and he still managed to maintain a decent amount of puck possession for himself. But in terms of that actually leading to good chances, definitely didn't happen all that much here tonight. His two wingers obviously not doing him much help. Luke Kunin, to a slightly lesser extent, I thought he was not great here tonight, but I guess he was not terrible either. Showed off some okay speed, was a okay compliment for Eklund, but because both were not really rolling, it didn't actually amount to anything. But the real odd man out on this second line was definitely Mike Hoffman. He came into this season with the reputation of being a bit of a lazy player, and I honestly haven't gotten a ton of that from Hoffman thus far this season, but here tonight was definitely the pinnacle of lazy player when it comes to Mike Hoffman. It just felt as though he was a step behind multiple times the Nashville Predators defensively, but not necessarily because he found himself out of position, but more so because there just wasn't that extra bit of effort to try and get into position when it comes for Mike Hoffman. So while I'm disappointed in Eklund and Kunin's performance here tonight, I'm really upset with Mike Hoffman's performance. So if there was going to be a healthy scratch candidate moving forward here for the San Jose Sharks, Hoffman would definitely be my number one choice. When it comes to the third line, this was a really good performance from these three players. So the first of which would be Barabanov returning to the lineup. It's been a struggle of a season for Barabanov. That is not a secret to anybody, including himself. He has set himself up with very high expectations just due to his performances in the last couple of years, coming into this season, final year of his contract, looking to perhaps even get out of the San Jose area and get to a team that's actually looking to do damage in the playoffs thus far this season. But that just hasn't really opened it up an opportunity for him because he's been playing all that bad. He was a healthy scratch in the previous game, comes back to the lineup, and thankfully for San Jose and for himself, he performed exceptionally well, doing some strong individual plays that eventually pushed things forward enough for San Jose to even drive his line forward, which has been a major criticism of mine for him thus far this season, where he's just not driving lines at all, even though we know he does have the capability and the skill to be able to do that, something we have seen in the past from him. Hopefully this is the start of something. It's important that it is, because the trade deadline is just a couple of weeks away at this point, and the Sharks are definitely going to be looking to move as many players as possible. Barabanov is a prime candidate for that, and this was a strong building block type of game that can hopefully carry forward. His other winger on the line would be Filip Zadina, who has, unlike Barabanov, been playing pretty well as of late. Obviously, that 4-point game really stands out from against Calgary, but even in the last couple of games, including the ones where he gets shut out by the Vegas Golden Knights, he's actually been one of the Sharks' better forwards, and here tonight that of course continued. Really strong performance for him. Gets the goal out of the traffic area, the dirty area that you like to say. Just generally is where these types of players will be able to score their goals from. So it's nice to see Zadina going to that position to be able to get those goals. He's just been one of the better Sharks forwards as of late. And then when it comes to Nico Sturm, maybe not as exciting offensively as the other two players on this line, but one thing that I definitely did appreciate of Nico Sturm's performance on the night is the fact that defensively he made a lot of nice plays to get it moving forward for this trio of players. As they say, the best offense, or technically they say the best defense is a good offense, but that also works the other way. The best offense is a strong defense, because if you're not playing in the defensive zone, that means usually you're playing in the offensive zone. So Sturm definitely worked that quite well here tonight, and definitely helped out his two wingers to have the offensive performance that they did. And then when it comes to the fourth line, we have Carpenter Bailey and Giovanni Smith returning to the lineup after a couple of months missing it. Smith has had a bit of a weird season thus far, comes into preseason, looks really, really good, seemed to be setting himself up to be a fourth line staple for the San Jose Sharks, but when we got into the regular season, there just wasn't really anything doing for Giovanni Smith. He hasn't necessarily been bad, usually, but he hasn't done anything positive for the San Jose Sharks. In fact, I would say Justin Bailey is a pretty good foil for Giovanni Smith, because Bus Bailey was the type of player that I was expecting Smith to be coming into this year, where Bailey is, every once in a while managing to contribute on the scoreboard, just being a solid fourth liner. Smith, nothing like that. So while he does return to the lineup just because he's healthy and it's like, show me what you can do in this situation, clearly there's not much doing. David Quinn seemingly agrees with me just based on the amount of minutes he actually got here tonight. And what ends up being the case here, because both Barabanov and Smith return to the lineup, two forwards have to step out, the first of which was Jacob McDonald, who was waived a couple of days ago, but the second of which was Kevin Labanc, which was definitely rather interesting to see, because Labanc, while maybe 2 games ago he wasn't very good, last game against the Las Vegas Golden Knights, he was one of the Sharks' better forwards. So I imagine it's a very frustrating situation for Kevin Labanc to be put on the sidelines, get healthy scratched when he has these offensive capabilities on a team that is struggling to score. Meanwhile, a player like Giovanni Smith, who hasn't played in so long and is not known for being an offensive juggernaut in any way, to get back into the lineup on this fourth line. So a choice that I don't necessarily fault David Quinn for a ton, but also not a very good choice either. From a defensive standpoint, we have the top pairing of Ferraro and Emberson. Offensively, I thought these two players did a pretty decent job here tonight. Not exactly contributing a ton on the score sheet, but keeping pucks alive on the blue line, making some decent moves in the neutral zone to force this one in. So I thought they were probably the all-around best defensive pairing for the San Jose Sharks, but where that does slightly differ is that they didn't have the high highs of the second defensive pairing for the Sharks. That would be both Thrun and Ruda. Obviously, the biggest high of the night from this pairing is Jan Ruda's strong pinch play on the Sharks' second goal of the night. I have criticized over these last few games Jan Ruda's aggressive offensive and neutral zone pinches, as he's been getting punished for them as of late. But here tonight, this one in particular, at the very least, did work out. He moves in aggressively all the way down the wall, keeps this puck alive in the offensive zone, then moves this around himself before playing it to the front, where Zadina is able to find it before the Predators goaltender Saros is able to locate it, which gives the Sharks that 3-2 goal that brought it back to within 1. So that was quite nice to see from Jan Ruda. From a defensive perspective, I don't think he was necessarily all that great and was kind of outperformed by the top pairing. Then when we get to Henry Thrun, he obviously had the major issue on the Sharks' third goal that they gave up, which was to Sherwood's second one, where he's caught flat-footed in the neutral zone. Sherwood is able to chip the puck past him to create that 2-on-1 for Nashville that would lead to a goal. So that was not that great. Other thing that I have noticed about Thrun, something I've mentioned in the past, is his aggressiveness when making those breakout passes. So the type of situation that arises many times per game for every single defenseman is when you're facing off against a couple of forecheckers who are trying to just pressure you into making the incorrect play, and both you and your defensive partner are near the face-off circle or on the face-off circle in your own defensive zone. You have the choice as a defender, just two options. Either you're trying to make an aggressive breakout pass, or you're making the very safe pass to your other defenseman, which will alleviate the slightest amount of pressure, but is more so just kind of fishing for an opening. And Thrun seems to always look for that aggressive pass up the ice. And we saw in the first period this situation arise where Thrun looks for that aggressive breakout pass. It gets intercepted, and while it didn't end up being a Nashville chance, the puck a few seconds later would end up back on Thrun's stick in the same exact situation where he will again look for the aggressive pass, and that one did work as it caught the Nashville Predators in a change, which allowed the Sharks to actually get a decent chance on net as they carried that puck into the offensive zone. But then later on in the third period, we again saw Thrun in this situation. He holds the puck for a very long time. You're thinking he's just going to default to the safe play to his defensive partner Ruda, but instead looked for the aggressive neutral zone pass that ends up getting picked off and ended up with a Nashville chance the other way. So I like that he's looking for these opportunities, because when they do work, it is very helpful to have a defenseman who is able to do that. But this is definitely going to be something that comes with more time for Thrun, where he's going to be able to learn when is the correct situation to actually go for these aggressive plays and when it is the correct situation to just go for the safer play that doesn't end up with a chance going the other way and back into your own zone. When it comes to the final defensive pairing on the night for the San Jose Sharks, I mean, what more can actually be said here about the defensive partner and the defensive pairing of both Burrows and Addison? It is very rarely ever good for San Jose, and this game is no exception to that. I mean, Addison, he was a player who was not even supposed to be dressing for tonight's game. It felt as though Vlasic was going to play, but then there's a last-second injury to him, so Addison steps in. If you thought maybe the threat of a healthy scratch would be a motivator for Addison, you would be wrong, because immediately out, just in his pretty much first shift. Technically, he is caught running around the defensive zone multiple times, losing board battles, giving the puck away, all within the span of just a 1-minute shift, essentially, in the defensive zone, which was very disappointing to watch. And then on his second or third shift of the game, he makes the ultimate mistake that leads to the Predators' first goal of this game from Kiefer Sherwood. And so just a really bad game for Addison. Burrows really wasn't all that much better. And on a defensive unit for the San Jose Sharks, where there isn't necessarily a ton of great players, it's not difficult to stand out in a positive light if you do well, and yet these two players managed to stand out in a negative light many times over. And then finally we get to the goaltender for the Sharks. That would be Kaapo Kähkönen, who put up a pretty good game, I would say. Only lets in 3 goals, which is certainly not bad in today's NHL, especially on a decent amount of shots that the Nashville Predators did end up getting, an above 900 save percentage on the night for Kähkönen. The major issue that I had is that while the first and second goals were pretty difficult to stop, the third one, even if it was a 2-on-1 situation, is one that I think Kähkönen would love to have back. Slightly off angle, is unable to get the close in the 7-hole that he ends up letting this goal into. If he manages to make that save, maybe this is a different game for San Jose. Maybe they manage to force the overtime, but it doesn't end up happening. And while I'm not putting the blame onto Kähkönen, definitely at least a bit that he could have done more to help out San Jose. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Tuesday, where they'll be taking on the New Jersey Devils. Unlike the last few weeks, the Sharks are now returning to a more normal schedule, and they'll be facing off against Timo Meier, who will be making his return to San Jose, I believe, for the first time since he was traded at near the end of last season, and we shall see how that one goes. Class dismissed.